For 16 years, Hannibal Barca haunted Rome's nightmares. The Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps with elephants, who slaughtered Roman armies at Trebia, at Lake Trasimene, at Cannae, that massacre where 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon, who marched through Italy like a god of war while Rome trembled behind its walls, too terrified to face him in open battle. 16 years of Roman mothers scaring their children into obedience with 3 words, Hannibal ad portas, Hannibal at the gates. But in October of 202 BCE, on a dusty plain near the North African city of Zama, everything changed. The hunter became the hunted. The tactical genius met his match. And Rome finally discovered how to kill the monster they'd created through their own arrogance. This is the story of how Scipio Africanus, a young Roman general who'd studied every one of Hannibal's victories, learned from every Roman defeat, turned Hannibal's own tactics against him. How he beat the master at his own game. How one battle ended 16 years of terror and changed the course of Western civilization forever. Because here's what they don't tell you in the simplified version. Zama wasn't won through Roman stubbornness or numerical superiority. It was won through intelligence. Adaptation. The willingness to learn from your enemy instead of just hating them. The Romans who faced Hannibal at Zama were not the same Romans who died at Cannae. They'd evolved. They'd studied. They'd done something that empires rarely do. They admitted their tactics were inferior and learned from the people who'd beaten them. Imagine that. Your worst enemy humiliates you repeatedly, kills your soldiers by the tens of thousands, occupies your homeland for over a decade. And instead of doubling down on the same failed strategies out of pride and tradition, you copy him. You steal his playbook. You train your army to think like he thinks, move like he moves, fight like he fights. That's not just military strategy. That's psychological warfare at its finest. Because when Hannibal rode onto that battlefield at Zama, he wasn't just facing a Roman army. He was facing a mirror. A reflection of himself. His own tactical innovations weaponized against him. And in that moment, the greatest general of the ancient world realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He'd taught Rome how to fight. If you want to understand how underdogs become victors, how empires learn from defeat, and how one battle can rewrite history, subscribe right now. Because the Battle of Zama isn't just about Rome versus Carthage. It's about the power of adaptation, the danger of complacency, and what happens when the student finally surpasses the teacher. Let me take you back to 202 BCE, to that dusty plain where elephants charged, where cavalry clashed, where 2 military geniuses faced each other knowing that only one would leave that field alive. This is the story of Rome's revenge. And it's glorious. To understand why Zama mattered, you need to understand what came before. You need to understand just how badly Hannibal had brutalized Rome. 218 BCE, Hannibal crosses the Alps, a feat everyone said was impossible, with 50,000 infantry, 9,000 cavalry and 37 war elephants. He descends into Italy like a biblical plague and immediately starts destroying Roman armies. Battle of Trebia, 218 BCE. Hannibal lures the Romans into an ambush in freezing water. Roman casualties, approximately 30,000. Carthaginian casualties, minimal. Battle of Lake Trasimene, 217 BCE. Hannibal sets a perfect ambush in fog. The Romans march straight into a death trap. 15,000 Romans killed in a few hours. The consul Flaminius dies without even knowing who killed him. It's the largest ambush in military history. Battle of Cannae, 216 BCE. This is where Hannibal becomes legend. Facing a Roman army of 86,000 men, the largest army Rome had ever fielded, Hannibal executes what military historians still call the perfect battle. His army of 50,000 uses a double envelopment tactic that completely surrounds the Romans. Then the slaughter begins. 70,000 Romans dead in one afternoon. 1 in 5 Roman military-aged males killed in a single battle. The consul Paulus dies on the field. The consul Varro flees in disgrace. Rome loses an entire generation. After Cannae, Rome was finished. At least it should have been. Any other nation would have surrendered. But Rome did something extraordinary. They refused to lose. They adopted the Fabian strategy, named after dictator Fabius Maximus. No more direct battles. Just harassment, guerrilla warfare, cutting supply lines, waiting for Hannibal to make a mistake. For 13 more years, Hannibal occupied southern Italy while Rome slowly, painfully rebuilt. And here's where our hero enters. Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio was 17 years old at Cannae. He survived that massacre, watched 70,000 men die around him, and instead of being traumatized into paralysis, he became obsessed. He studied Hannibal's tactics like a graduate student studies their thesis. He learned Carthaginian military doctrine, African cavalry tactics, how to use terrain, how to deploy reserves, how to coordinate infantry and cavalry. While Rome cowered behind their walls, Scipio was training, learning, planning. In 210 BCE, at age 25, he was given command of Roman forces in Spain. Everyone thought he was too young, too inexperienced, too influenced by foreign tactics. They were right about all of it. That's why he won. Scipio conquered Carthaginian Spain in 3 years using Hannibal's own tactics against Carthaginian armies. He didn't fight like a Roman, he fought like Hannibal. Mobile warfare. Psychological operations. Speed over strength. Intelligence over tradition. In 204 BCE, he did what no Roman had dared. He invaded Africa. Took the war to Carthage itself. Started burning Carthaginian territory, threatening their capital. Suddenly Carthage faced an existential crisis. They recalled Hannibal from Italy, Hannibal who'd been undefeated in open battle for 15 years. Hannibal who'd humiliated Rome so thoroughly they were still finding mass graves from Cannae. Bring Hannibal home, give him a fresh army, and let him deal with this arrogant young Roman who thinks he's clever. So in 202 BCE, Hannibal returned to Africa for the first time in 36 years. He'd left as a boy, accompanied by his father Hamilcar to Spain. He returned as a legend, as Rome's nightmare made flesh, as the greatest general alive. And waiting for him was Scipio Africanus, Africanus being a title he'd earn after this battle, with a Roman army that didn't fight like Romans anymore. The two generals actually met before the battle. A parley. They talked strategy, discussed terms, measured each other. Ancient sources say they recognized each other as equals, two masters of their craft about to engage in the ultimate contest. Then negotiations failed. And both men returned to their armies knowing that tomorrow, one of them would be destroyed. Think about the psychological weight of that moment. You're Hannibal, undefeated for 15 years. And you're facing a Roman who fights exactly like you do. How do you beat a mirror? That's the question Hannibal had to answer. And he couldn't. October 19, 202 BCE. Near the town of Zama, about 5 days' march southwest of Carthage. Two armies face each other across a dusty plain. Hannibal's forces, approximately 50,000 men, including Carthaginian veterans from Italy, local North African troops, and Celtiberian mercenaries. Plus 80 war elephants, massive beasts meant to terrify and trample the Romans. Scipio's forces, approximately 40,000 Romans and Numidian allies. Outnumbered but better trained and, critically, better led. Hannibal's battle plan was classic Hannibal. Send the elephants first to break the Roman lines and cause chaos, then follow with infantry to exploit the disorder, then use cavalry on the flanks to encircle. It's a variation of the Cannae playbook. It had worked dozens of times. But Scipio had studied Cannae. He knew exactly what was coming. The battle begins. Hannibal sends his 80 elephants charging forward. An overwhelming, terrifying sight. War elephants could weigh 5 to 6 tons, stand 10 feet tall, and trample anything in their path. Rome had lost battles just from the psychological impact of facing elephants. But Scipio did something brilliant. He opened corridors in his formation. Instead of presenting a solid line for elephants to crash into, his legions simply parted. Let the elephants run through the gaps. Then his skirmishers, light troops with javelins, attacked the elephants from the sides, wounding them, panicking them. Wounded elephants don't charge forward. They stampede backward. Into their own army. Hannibal's elephant corps, his shock weapon, his trump card, just trampled his own North African infantry. First phase of the battle, complete Roman victory. Phase 2, infantry clash. This is where battles are usually decided. The grinding, brutal combat where men push against men with shields and swords until one side breaks. Hannibal's front lines were mercenaries and less experienced troops. Expendable. His strategy was to wear down the Romans with these troops while keeping his Italian veterans, his best soldiers, in reserve. Classic tactical depth. Scipio saw through it. He ordered his veteran legions to simply hold position during the initial clash. Don't advance. Don't pursue. Just hold. Let Hannibal's mercenaries exhaust themselves against Roman shields while the real battle develops elsewhere. Because Scipio knew, the real battle would be won by cavalry. This is the critical innovation. At Cannae, Hannibal's cavalry had encircled the Romans. That's what made it a massacre. So Scipio allied with Massinissa, the king of Numidia, and secured the best cavalry in North Africa for his own army. When the cavalry engagement began on the flanks, Scipio's cavalry, Roman and Numidian combined, drove off Hannibal's cavalry completely. Chased them off the battlefield. Now here's the genius move. Instead of declaring victory and looting the enemy camp like undisciplined cavalry usually did, Scipio's cavalry wheeled around and came back. They drilled this maneuver. Trained for it. The cavalry that was supposed to be celebrating victory instead returned to the battlefield. Hannibal, watching from his command position, realized what was about to happen. He saw Scipio's cavalry returning. He saw his own front lines broken or exhausted. He saw the trap closing. For the first time in his career, Hannibal was on the wrong side of a Cannae-style encirclement. He committed his Italian veterans, those men who'd marched with him across the Alps, who'd fought at Trebia and Cannae, who were the best infantry in the Mediterranean. They crashed into the Roman lines with the desperation of men who know they're losing. The fighting became apocalyptic. Ancient sources describe bodies stacked so high that soldiers had to climb over corpses to reach the enemy. The dust, the blood, the screams, this was war at its most primal. And then Scipio's cavalry hit Hannibal's rear. The encirclement was complete. The Romans, using Hannibal's own tactical masterpiece, began crushing the Carthaginian army from all sides. Not as dramatically as Cannae, because Hannibal's veterans fought with suicidal courage, but the result was inevitable. 20,000 Carthaginians died on that field. 20,000 more were captured. Hannibal's army, the army that had terrorized Italy for 16 years, was annihilated. Hannibal himself escaped with a small group of cavalry. He rode through the dust and chaos back to Carthage, knowing what he'd just witnessed, his own defeat, achieved using his own tactics by a student who'd surpassed the master. The greatest general of the ancient world had just been beaten at his own game by a 33-year-old Roman who'd learned one critical lesson. The best way to defeat a genius is to become one. Scipio didn't just win a battle. He ended an era. Rome's nightmare was over. Hannibal, invincible Hannibal, had been proven mortal. And Rome would never forget how they did it. The immediate aftermath of Zama was brutal for Carthage. They had no army left. No elephants. No great general who could save them. They sued for peace on whatever terms Rome demanded. The Treaty of 201 BCE destroyed Carthage as a power. Carthage lost all territory outside Africa. They had to surrender their entire fleet except for 10 ships. They paid an enormous indemnity, 10,000 talents over 50 years, crippling their economy for generations. They couldn't wage war without Roman permission, effectively making them a Roman client state. Carthage went from Rome's greatest rival to Rome's subordinate in a single afternoon. But the more fascinating story is what happened to the two generals whose genius shaped the battle. Scipio Africanus returned to Rome as the greatest hero in Roman history. He was 33 years old. He'd saved Rome. He'd defeated Hannibal. He was granted the honor of a triumph, the most prestigious ceremony in Rome, where he paraded through the streets while crowds chanted his name. Africanus, the conqueror of Africa, the savior of Rome. But here's where Roman politics gets ugly. Success breeds jealousy. Scipio had become too popular, too powerful, too different from the traditional Roman model. He'd won by adapting foreign tactics, by being flexible rather than rigid, by thinking like Hannibal instead of like a proper Roman. The conservative faction in the Senate, led by Cato the Elder, began attacking him. They accused him of corruption, of keeping spoils of war for himself, of being too Hellenized, too un-Roman. The charges were probably false, definitely politically motivated. Scipio, disgusted with Roman ingratitude, retired from public life. He died around 183 BCE in voluntary exile at his estate in Laternum, bitter that Rome had turned on the man who saved them. His tomb bore an inscription that captured his resentment. Ingrata patria eneasa cadem mea hafs. Ungrateful fatherland, you don't even have my bones. The savior of Rome died feeling betrayed by Rome. That's the reality of politics, today and 2,200 years ago. And Hannibal? His story is even more tragic. After Zama, Hannibal didn't retire. He became a political reformer in Carthage, trying to rebuild the city, fight corruption, restore prosperity. He was successful, too successful. Roman observers worried that Hannibal might make Carthage powerful again. So Rome demanded his surrender. In 195 BCE, facing Roman extradition, Hannibal fled Carthage. He spent his final years as a wandering exile, offering his military genius to anyone who'd fight Rome, the Seleucids in Syria, the kingdom of Bithynia and Anatolia. But everyone was afraid. Rome's shadow was too long. In 183 BCE, possibly the same year Scipio died, Hannibal was cornered in Bithynia by Roman agents demanding his capture. Rather than face the humiliation of being paraded through Rome in chains, Hannibal took poison. His last words, according to Livy, "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Even in death, Hannibal couldn't resist one final jab at Roman paranoia. The man who'd terrorized them for 16 years went out on his own terms, denying them the satisfaction of his capture. Both generals, the two greatest military minds of their age, died in bitter exile, betrayed by the nations they'd served. Hannibal by Rome's relentless pursuit. Scipio by Rome's ingratitude. The Battle of Zama didn't just determine the winner of the Second Punic War. It set Rome on the path to empire. With Carthage broken and Hannibal defeated, no Mediterranean power could challenge Rome. Within 50 years they'd conquered Greece. Within 100 years they controlled the entire Mediterranean, the Mare Nostrum, RC. But the true legacy of Zama isn't territorial. It's tactical. Scipio proved that military doctrine isn't sacred. That the best strategy is the one that wins regardless of where it came from. That learning from your enemies is strength, not weakness. If that lesson resonates, hit that like button and share this video. Because the story of how Rome beat Hannibal isn't just ancient history, it's a masterclass in adaptation that's still relevant today. So what does a 2,200-year-old battle in North Africa teach us about life today? Everything about ego, adaptation, and the danger of past success. Hannibal lost at Zama because he assumed the tactics that worked for 16 years would keep working forever. He'd perfected a military system, mobile warfare, tactical encirclement, psychological manipulation, and he believed that perfection was permanent. But perfection is never permanent. Systems that work today become obsolete tomorrow when someone smarter learns from them and evolves. Scipio understood this. He didn't try to out-Roman Hannibal by being more traditionally Roman. He didn't double down on the rigid legion formations and frontal assaults that had failed at Cannae. Instead, he did something revolutionary. He admitted Roman tactics were inferior and adopted Carthaginian methods. That takes incredible intellectual humility. Imagine being a proud Roman commander and saying, "Actually, our enemy fights better than we do. Let's learn from them." That's not weakness, that's wisdom. We see this pattern everywhere. Companies that dominate their industry but refuse to adapt when the market changes. They collapse. Kodak invented the digital camera, then refused to embrace it because they were invested in film. Blockbuster could have bought Netflix for $50 million, but they were too proud to admit streaming was the future. Athletes who rely on physical gifts while ignoring fundamentals, then get surpassed by hungrier competitors who study the game. Musicians who perfect one style, then become irrelevant when tastes change. Individuals who build their identity around being the best at something, then refuse to evolve when their field transforms. The expert who becomes obsolete because they stopped learning. Hannibal at Zama is all of these stories. The master who became so confident in his mastery that he stopped innovating. Who assumed his genius alone would be enough, while his student was in the gym, studying tapes, learning every trick, preparing for the one moment that would define both their legacies. And here's the really uncomfortable lesson. Hannibal was still brilliant at Zama. His tactics weren't bad. His strategy was sound. He just faced someone who'd absorbed all his knowledge and added their own innovations on top. That's the nightmare scenario for any expert, any leader, any person at the top of their field. The moment when you realize someone has learned everything you know, and then learn more. The only defense is to keep learning yourself. To never assume you figured everything out. To remain a student even when you're the teacher. To steal shamelessly from anyone who does something better than you, regardless of whether they're friend, enemy, or stranger. Scipio beat Hannibal because Scipio remained humble enough to learn from the man who'd humiliated Rome. He checked his ego at the door and asked, "How did he beat us? What can I learn from that?" That question, "What can I learn from this?" is the difference between growth and stagnation, between victory and defeat, between legacy and footnote. Hannibal asked that question for 16 years while he was winning. Then he stopped asking. He thought he'd mastered war itself. He thought he was unbeatable. At Zama he learned the truth. Nobody is unbeatable forever. Someone is always studying you, learning from you, preparing to surpass you. The question is, are you still studying them? Or have you become so comfortable with your past victories that you've stopped preparing for the future? Because that's when the student becomes the master. That's when your own tactics are used to destroy you. That's when you become Hannibal at Zama, brilliant, legendary, and utterly defeated. That's the story of Zama, the battle where Rome's greatest enemy finally met his match. Where the student surpassed the master. Where adaptation defeated genius. Hannibal Barca, 16 years undefeated, then destroyed in a single afternoon by his own tactics turned against him. Scipio Africanus, the Roman who thought like a Carthaginian and saved Rome because of it. And the lesson: past success is no guarantee of future victory. The moment you stop learning is the moment you start losing. Next time I'm telling you about another military genius who dominated for years, then made one catastrophic mistake that cost them everything. A battle that should have been impossible to lose, with overwhelming numerical superiority, fighting on home territory, against an exhausted enemy. And they lost anyway. Because overconfidence is the deadliest weapon your enemy can use against you. Think Zama was dramatic? Wait until you hear about the battle where the largest army in history was destroyed by an enemy 1/10 its size. Where hubris met reality and reality won so decisively that it changed world history forever. But only if you subscribe. Here's the thing. Military history is filled with lessons about strategy, adaptation, and human nature. Lessons that apply to everything from business to relationships to personal growth. Asterisk asterisk. If you click away now, these stories fade back into the dusty textbooks where nobody reads them. The lessons remain unlearned. The patterns repeat. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Comment below. Are you more like Hannibal, confident in your mastery, or Scipio, always learning from others? Be honest. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that staying on top requires constant adaptation. Because history doesn't remember the people who rested on past victories. It remembers the people who kept evolving. I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe. These ancient lessons are still teaching us today.